There is one form of movement that can change your blood sugar faster than most people realize. And it's not jogging. It's not spending an hour on the treadmill. It's not punishing yourself after a meal you feel guilty about. It's using your muscles with enough intensity that they start acting like a glucose sponge. And today, I want to explain exactly these type of exercises and some of the most powerful tools you have for improving insulin sensitivity, especially if you're living with type 2 diabetes, pre-diabetes, or stubborn fasting glucose. But before we get into that, let me say something clearly right at the start. Walking is excellent. Walking after meals is one of the most underrated tools for blood sugar control, and I have talked about it many times. A short walk after eating lowers post-meal glucose because working muscles pull glucose out of the bloodstream and use it for energy. Research shows that light to moderate activity after meals reduces postprandial glucose exposure and glucose variability. That is real and that matters. But resistance exercise is different, and the difference is bigger than most people realize. High blood sugar is not random. It is the result of three things happening at once. First, glucose is sitting in your bloodstream because your muscle cells are not pulling it in efficiently. Second, your liver is releasing extra glucose even when you don't need it because insulin resistance is giving it the wrong signal. Third, fat has accumulated inside your muscle and liver cells and is jamming the machinery that insulin needs to move glucose where it belongs. Most people only ever hear about the first one. Nobody connects all three, and that is exactly what this video is going to fix. If you want our free step-by-step guide to reversing insulin resistance with food and movement, comment guide below, completely free. Let me show you what is actually happening inside your cells. Your skeletal muscle is the largest glucose sink in your entire body. Most people have never been told that, and it changes everything. After you eat, glucose enters the bloodstream, and your muscle is supposed to be the main place it goes, not floating around causing problems. Into the muscle, stored as glycogen, burned for energy. That is the design. But when excess fat accumulates inside muscle cells, that process breaks down. The muscle stops responding to insulin's signal efficiently. Glucose has nowhere to go, so it stays in the bloodstream longer than it should. Your pancreas pumps out more insulin trying to fix a problem it cannot reach, and your numbers stay high. That is insulin resistance in muscle, and it's one of the primary reasons carbohydrate-rich foods feel dangerous when they are not. Here is the important part. The muscle is not broken. It is congested, and congested tissue can be cleared. That is exactly what resistance exercise helps do through a mechanism most people have never heard of. Now, here is where it gets powerful. Your muscle has two ways to absorb glucose. The first is the insulin pathway. Insulin signals GLUT4 transporters to move to the surface of the cell where they can pull glucose in from the bloodstream. GLUT4 is essentially a glucose doorway built into the wall of your muscle cell. Most of the time, these doors are stored inside the cell like furniture in a warehouse. Insulin's signal moves them to the surface. The doors get installed, glucose walks through. But here's the part that changes everything. Muscle contraction can also move GLUT4 to the surface without insulin. Research on GLUT4 and skeletal muscle glucose uptake shows that exercise training is one of the most potent stimuli for increasing GLUT4 expression, which directly explains why exercise improves insulin action even when insulin signaling itself is impaired. In plain English, even when the main door is sticky and slow, your muscle contraction opens a side door, and that side door is coordinated by a cellular energy sensor called AMPK. AMPK stands for AMP activated protein kinase. The concept is simple even if the name is not. AMPK is the energy accountant inside your muscle cell. It is constantly checking the budget. When you are resting, the energy account is stable. But when you do squats, push-ups, step-ups, or resistance movements, your muscle starts spending energy fast. ATP, your immediate energy currency, gets used quickly. The cell senses the demand has spiked. AMPK looks at the books and says, we are spending fast. Bring in fuel. Open more doors now. Reviews of AMPK and exercise confirm that AMPK plays an important role in regulating glucose uptake during exercise and contributes to the insulin sensitizing effects of both single bouts and long-term training. So AMPK is the warehouse manager yelling, forklifts to the loading dock, we need glucose now. And GLUT4 is the loading dock door. That is why a short burst of resistance exercise can sometimes improve improve glucose faster than a much longer, easy walk. Not because walking is bad, but because walking whispers to the muscle. Squats speak louder. A push-up speaks louder. A set of step-ups speaks louder. Let me be very specific here, because this is where the evidence gets genuinely exciting. One study on what's called exercise snacks tested brief, intense exercise before meals versus one longer session of continuous, moderate exercise in people with insulin resistance. The brief exercise snacks were more effective for improving post-meal glucose control, showing reductions in post-meal glucose after breakfast and dinner, and a lower post-meal glucose across the entire day. That is fascinating because it challenges the idea that exercise only works if it is long. Sometimes the signal matters more than the duration. Another study looked at interrupting prolonged sitting with brief activity, including short walking breaks and bodyweight squats. The researchers found that breaking up sitting with brief activity improved glycemic control, and bodyweight squats were one of the methods that moved the needle. Think about what that means. You can sit all day and then take one long walk, and that is better than doing nothing. But you can also send your muscles repeated glucose clearing signals throughout the day. A few chair squats, a few wall push-ups, a few calf raises, a few step-ups. Each contraction sends the muscle a message. Wake up, open the doors, pull glucose in. And a 2022 systematic review and meta-analysis found that resistance training is effective for decreasing A1C in adults with type 2 diabetes. Crucially, it also found that greater improvements in muscular strength were associated with greater reductions in A1C. That last point matters more than most people realize. The glucose benefit is not random. As muscle gets stronger, the metabolic effect improves. Strength is not vanity. Strength is a glucose strategy. And then there's this. A single bout of exercise can increase insulin sensitivity for up to 48 hours. Research on high-intensity exercise has shown that one session can improve insulin sensitivity well into the recovery period, meaningfully improving glycemic control the following day. That means the benefits do not stop when the set ends. You do squats today, and your muscle may remain more receptive to glucose tomorrow. That's a very different story than I have to exercise for hours to make up for eating. You are changing the signal. You are changing the tissue. You are changing the system. Now, what's actually better for your blood sugar? Walking or resistance exercise? Here's the honest comparison, because I do not want this to become an either-or conversation. Walking is low risk, accessible, and genuinely excellent. It improves circulation, supports cardiovascular health, lowers post-meal glucose, improves mood, and can be done every day. Research and clinical guidelines strongly support walking as a therapeutic tool in type 2 diabetes. Please keep walking. But here is the distinction that matters. Walking uses muscle. Resistance training upgrades muscle. A walk may help squeeze the sponge a little. Resistance exercise helps clean the sponge, expand the sponge, and make the sponge thirsty again. The American Diabetes Association position statement notes that resistance training benefits people with type 2 diabetes through improvements in glycemic control, insulin resistance, fat mass, blood pressure, strength, and lean body mass. And the clinical guidelines increasingly support combining aerobic activity with resistance training, not choosing between them. Walking opens a small drain. Resistance exercise pulls the drain cover off entirely. The muscle becomes genuinely hungry for glucose. And here is the part of the conversation that most people never get told. Skeletal muscle is the largest glucose sink in the human body. It's not just tissue for strength and balance. It's one of the main storage tanks for carbohydrate. When muscle is insulin sensitive, glucose moves out of the bloodstream and into muscle efficiently. When muscle is insulin resistant, glucose stays stuck in the blood longer than it should. A major review on resistance training for diabetes prevention and therapy notes that resistance training improves type 2 diabetes management through improved GLUT4 content, increased muscle mass, reduced visceral fat, and improved insulin sensitivity. Think of it in terms of parking. Imagine a city with only 5 parking garages. Traffic backs up, cars circle the block, gridlock. That is what happens when muscle mass is low and insulin resistance is high. Now imagine the city builds 50 new, clean, organized parking garages. Traffic flows, cars park easily, the streets clear. That is what insulin-sensitive muscle does for glucose. It creates storage, it creates demand, it creates somewhere for carbohydrate to go. This is why we are not afraid of carbohydrate. carbohydrates. We are interested in restoring carbohydrate tolerance. When someone says rice spikes me, or fruit spikes me, or potatoes spike me, I understand why that feels frightening, but the spike is not proof that the food caused diabetes. It is evidence that the muscle and liver are not yet handling glucose efficiently. The goal is not to live forever avoiding the foods your body was designed to metabolize. The goal is to restore the machinery, and resistance exercise is one of the fastest ways to start restoring it. Let me talk about it. Squats and push-ups specifically, because they deserve real attention. A squat is one of the most useful movements in existence because it recruits some of the largest muscles in the body: quadriceps, glutes, hamstrings, and core. These are massive glucose-consuming tissues, and you do not need a barbell to get the benefit. Standing up from a chair is a squat. Sitting down slowly and with control is a squat. Holding a countertop and bending your knees is a squat. For someone just starting out, a chair stand is plenty. For someone stronger, bodyweight squats are appropriate. For someone more advanced, adding resistance makes sense. The key is not perfection. The key is contraction. When those large leg muscles contract repeatedly, they call for fuel. And because they are big muscles, the glucose demand is meaningful. You are not just moving your body. You are sending a strong signal to some of the largest metabolic real estate you own. Push-ups work differently, but they matter too. A push-up against the wall, a countertop push-up, an incline push-up, or a floor push-up recruits the chest, shoulders, triceps, and core. These muscles are not as large as the legs, but they still create a strong contraction signal, and they build upper body strength that becomes increasingly important with age. And remember, we're not just chasing a single post-meal glucose number. We're rebuilding metabolic capacity. Here is where a lot of people get stuck. They use exercise only as a blood sugar eraser. They eat, see a spike, panic, and try to burn it off. That mindset keeps you in fear. It turns movement into punishment and food into a threat. I want you to think about it differently. Exercise is not punishment for eating. Exercise is communication with your muscle. It tells your muscle to become more insulin sensitive. It tells your muscle to make more glucose stores. It tells your muscle to store more glycogen. It tells your mitochondria, the energy producing machinery inside your cells, to become more active and more efficient. That is not punishment. That is restoration. Low carb diets can reduce the blood sugar number temporarily by reducing the glucose entering the bloodstream, but the underlying carbohydrate intolerance often remains. The Mastering Diabetes approach works differently. We want your muscle and liver cells to hear insulin again. We want the glucose doors to open. We want carbohydrate tolerance restored, and resistance exercise fits perfectly into that goal because it does two things simultaneously. First, it creates an immediate glucose demand right now, this set, this contraction. Second, it improves the tissue that determines your long-term glucose tolerance. That's not one benefit. That's two very different time frames working together. Go ahead and comment guide to get our free manual that will help you reverse insulin resistance and restore carbohydrate tolerance. With meal plans included, 100% free. So what does this look like in real life? You finish breakfast. Instead of sitting for 3 hours, you take a gentle walk. Later in the morning or before lunch, you do a short round of chair stands or wall push-ups. Not because you're punishing your body, because you're reminding your muscles to open the glucose doors. After dinner, you take another walk or do a few simple body weight movements. Over weeks, you gradually get stronger. The chair stand becomes easier. The wall push-up becomes a countertop push-up. Your legs feel more stable. Your glucose numbers begin to tell a completely different story. And as your diet becomes lower in fat and richer in whole plant foods, the congestion inside your muscle cells begins to clear. Fruit stops feeling scary. Beans stop feeling scary. Potatoes stop feeling scary. Oatmeal stops feeling scary, because the problem was never that those foods were poisonous. The problem was that the glucose storage system was overwhelmed and insulin resistant. Now, if you take insulin or medications that can lower blood glucose, exercise can increase the risk of hypoglycemia. This is something to discuss with your healthcare provider, especially if you are making major changes in diet, movement, or both. Do not stop medication on your own. Do not use exercise as a replacement for medical supervision. But also, don't underestimate your body's ability to change. Your muscles are not broken. They are trainable. Your insulin sensitivity is not fixed. It can improve. Your glucose tolerance is not gone forever. It can come back. Let's zoom all the way out, because the most powerful message here is bigger than any single squat. Muscle contraction activates AMPK and moves GLUT4 transporters to the cell surface, opening an insulin-independent side door for glucose disposal that works even when insulin signaling is impaired. A single resistance exercise session can increase insulin sensitivity for up to 48 hours, meaning the benefit extends far beyond the workout itself. Over time, resistance training increases muscle mass, GLUT4 expression, mitochondrial efficiency, and glycogen storage capacity, giving glucose more places to go and making insulin's job easier every single day. And resistance exercise works best as part of a larger system. Low-fat, plant-based whole food nutrition reduces the intracellular fat that jams the signal, while consistent movement tells the muscle to open its doors. Neither one works as well without the other, but together they change the biology underneath the numbers. So keep walking. Walk after meals. Walk because it supports your heart and clears your mind, but add strength. Add squats, add push-ups, add chair stands and step-ups and resistance bands in whatever form is appropriate for your body right now. Because walking uses muscle, resistance training upgrades muscle. And upgraded muscle is the closest thing to a permanent improvement in your glucose storage system. That is insulin sensitivity, and that is what we are building toward. Not carb restriction, not fear, not white-knuckling every meal. A body that can eat whole, carbohydrate-rich foods and use them beautifully. If you want our free guide on how to put this into practice, comment guide below. If this video helped you, hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and share it with someone who has been told the only answer to high blood sugar is eating less. Until next time, keep those carbs high and that A1C low.